In this episode of Elevating Our Stories, we're introducing a new host and diving into the fabulous world of jobs in the clean energy economy and the policy that makes this inclusive and equitable future possible. I'm Sylvia Ewing, and this is my co-host, Pastor Booker Vance, and our very special guest, Delmar Gillus, Chief Operating Officer of Elevate and one of the principal equity negotiators for the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, also known as CEJA. Welcome, everyone. That's a mouthful. I said it. I'm glad. Delmar, thank you so much for coming back. Help us get started. What is CEJA, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act?
Well, thank you, Sylvia. It's a pleasure to be on, and I'm really excited to be here today. CEJA is, as you mentioned, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. It was passed in September of 2021. And basically what CEJA is it's nation-leading legislation passed here in Illinois that is going to help stimulate the clean energy economy. So it does everything from helping with solar incentives, EV incentives. It helps us understand and cut the use of carbon. The law is going to move Illinois to 100% carbon-free power by 2045. And most importantly, it's focused on equitable access and jobs. So a lot of the law is built around making sure that people of color, women, and those that typically have been left out have access to not just the benefits, but also the economic development opportunities of the clean energy economy.
Love it.
So, Delmar, where are we now? That's the important question, and what's going on with the legislation and the funding, and how can people see CEJA in action in their daily lives?
Yeah, I think that's the hot question, Pastor Vance, around where are we and what's going on. The best way I could summarize it is we're in the implementation phase. So basically what we're doing now, the law was passed, and once passed, there's a process to get all of the pieces in place, which is called the regulatory process. And then once that's completed, implementation can begin. So pieces of the legislation, like many of the incentives around solar and other aspects of the bill, went live pretty quickly, like within a year of the bill passing. But there are other aspects of the bill, such as the workforce development components and many of the job creation pieces that are still being implemented. So over the next, I would say, year or so, people are going to start to see opportunities come online for things like training, things like on-the-job opportunities, things like additional job postings. So it's in process. We're making good progress, but I also understand that there's a lot of people that are getting excited waiting for these opportunities to come online.
Which lets me kind of follow up with what you just said. How does regular people, the regular folk, get access to a discussion and participate in the changes that will help battle climate change and grow generational wealth in communities that have often been left out? Some of the neighborhoods have never been involved, and so how do we make sure that we can make sure they have access?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that all of us can do as this bill starts to kind of take shape and get implemented. One thing that I would say that's important is I always recommend that people talk with their local legislators. So whether it's your city council member, your alderman, your state senator, etc. They keep very close track on the progress of the legislation. So I always recommend that you start there. But in addition to that, the bill was designed to have communication components. So there are organizations at the state level, one of which is the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, or DCEO, that's responsible for putting information out about not just the implementation of the various components, but also things like, where can I get training? What training is going to be available? Where are the jobs? So one of the easy ways of staying on top of things is if you go into Google and put in there CEJA, C-E-J-A, and then the letters DCEO, what'll come up as your first choice is the DCEO CEJA page, and there's actually a link on that page where you can sign up for the mailing list and they literally will keep you up to date and informed. And also there's a place where if you're interested in opportunities, it has more information, both for contractor opportunities, if you run a Black, brown, or woman-owned business especially, or if you're interested in training. So there's a lot of information that's readily available on that website.
Well, and I've heard you say in interviews that it's about jobs, jobs, jobs. How does that play out? What does it mean? And my follow-up question is, do your local elected officials really know about it? After you talk about jobs, I want to name names about who helped make this legislation possible, but jobs.
Yes. So from a jobs perspective, Sylvia, that was the primary focus of the legislation. When we were in the room negotiating, what has historically happened is that communities of color especially have felt left out of large legislation. And the governor made it his priority, as well as his team, as well as the environmental community, as well as organized labor and many other stakeholders, that job creation and access to opportunities was critically important. So what was built into the bill were specific programs. For instance, there's a prime contractor accelerator program that's designed especially for Black, brown, and other underserved contractors to get not just training and support, but also access to capital for solar projects. There are other programs that are there for initial entrepreneurs. So if you're interested in, say, getting into the solar space, you don't really have a background in these areas, there are going to be courses and training that are going to be put in place for you to get access to opportunities. The Illinois Power Agency, also another state agency, has a website. So once again, if you Google Illinois IPA and then go to their equity portal, you literally can sign up there, and the portal is designed to match job seekers with upcoming opportunities so that there's a matchmaking process. So the goal is that if 40% of the state are Black, brown, and underserved communities, then there should be jobs and opportunities and benefits for the 40%. So there's a large focus on job creation, access to jobs, and access to opportunities.
That 40% number is interesting because that ties into the Justice 40 initiative and Biden-Harris administration laying that out. Another show will talk about the Justice 40 accelerator. But when you talked about who was at the table, business, labor, et cetera, that was all work done by the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition.
Correct.
Going back, who were the original sponsors, and how did we find the ability to collaborate to have what is probably like the most equitable legislation in the country?
Yes, and thanks for asking about that, Sylvia, because that was one of the most passionate aspects of this whole process for me. I can remember distinctly when I was at the governor's bill signing and I was honored to be one of the speakers. One of the things that really touched me was all of the stakeholders that contributed to the bill. So you had folks like Cheryl Johnson who told the
People
story.
for community recovery.
Yes, exactly, and how she wanted to start a solar project but didn't have the capital that she needed to do it. And so she needed a capital solution. That got built into the bill. We had Juliana Pino, who was passionate about equity and about communities being treated fairly, and as a community activist fought hard for that. Nicole Salisbury fought really hard to make sure that returning residents and formerly incarcerated individuals had access to jobs. And literally, I could run the list of all of these community leaders, and our process was focused on a listen, lead, share approach. So we started off by listening, gathering what we were hearing and listening, formulating legislative language around that, and then having stakeholders like Senator Christina Castro lead the charge in the negotiating room with her peers to make these ideas legislative language. So it was a full community coalition, legislators, organized labor partnership with the governor's office to make all of this happen. So we're really excited about what the bill is doing.
Well, thanks for that and name checking a little bit. I appreciate that. Pastor Vance, in your previous role, I think you were involved in some of that work and the education work and the community work. What was the most impressive thing about CEJA and the passage of the law to you?
The most important thing for me was the fact that it was trying to make sure it got grassroots. Even some of the folk that you mentioned are good leaders, but the question is, how do we get it to the hood and to the neighborhood and to the streets? And even now, I know the bill is still being rolled out, and we're still trying to make sure that the right people or the folk that are really need are the ones who have access. And
well, and I know, Delmar, we're going to ask you about some of the federal legislation, but I can't let your mentioning of Cheryl Johnson go by without saying Elevate and some local funders are part of producing Help This Garden Grow, which is an outstanding podcast documentary about Hazel Johnson, Cheryl's mama, the mother of the environmental justice movement. And if you go to our website, elevatemp.org, or maybe we'll put some magic information up on the screen, but don't sleep on Help This Garden Grow. Multiple episodes, you can listen to it while you're doing stuff, and it tells you a lot of the background, the history that brought us to this day. When you're thinking about what the future holds and what initiatives that we should know about, what should we keep our eyes on?
I think an important place to start actually is where you left off, Sylvia, which is we have to know our history around these things. You have folks like Cheryl Johnson, Hazel Johnson, Naomi Davis is another person that's been a warrior in this space for literally decades. And it's important to recognize and realize that the progress that the younger generations are going to be able to make on this is on the shoulders of those great leaders. So I really appreciate you highlighting the opportunity for us to learn and grow. But I feel kind of moving forward, it's going to be critically important that we stay engaged, that we lock in on making sure that this law gets implemented the way that Pastor Vance said, which is to focus on communities, community opportunities. The good news is because we used a collaborative community-based approach, when we got to the end, everybody was engaged. So my biggest fear is that we have literally 100% engagement. We have communities involved, we have legislators involved, we have everybody involved, and then over time that engagement starts to decrease. But what I'm seeing is that thanks to the hard work of the Sherrills, and Pastor Vance honestly is doing a lot, and organizations like Elevate are doing a lot, it's critically important that we keep a focus on, are we meeting our goals? Are we meeting our targets? Are we delivering? Are the dollars that are dedicated and allocated for communities of color, are they reaching the audiences? Are we seeing solar in neighborhoods that didn't historically have solar? And more importantly, if we're not, Sylvia, we don't want to just be like, oh, well, we'll get them next time. We need to raise our voices. We need to engage. We need to collaborate with our legislators to make sure that if things aren't being done, that they get done. The last thing I would say is there's been a lot of talk about, hey, it's 2 years out, everything's not ready, what's wrong?
Oh yeah, I heard you on the radio about that.
Yes, and I'm trying to take a different perspective. What I'm trying to do is ask myself the question, what can I be doing today, tomorrow, next week to make this happen? Because this is all about us and us working together. So one of the things I would challenge folks to do is that rather than looking at things and saying, hey, it's not where it needs to be, it's not going to do this, flip it and say, okay, you know, this is hard, this is nation leading, never been done before. What special skills do I have? What special talents do I have? how can I bring those to the table so that we can get this done?
And we also know that it's not just, we're like almost like halfway, we've got a little more time to talk, but it's not just being able to climb up on a ladder
Yes.
and be a solar contractor, right? Like we need education, we need training, and if you're an electrician, there's room for you in this work. Pastor Vance, what would you like to add?
Well, and I think the issue is how do we pivot? Because when we run into roadblocks, we need to learn how to pivot and then make adjustments in order that people in our community can have access, in which I'm real thankful that you continue to lift that up. But if we don't pivot, then we can throw our hands up. I also, one of the things they talk about in communities, sometimes there are haters running around, and you got to make sure that the people who may not have benefited initially, we can find places for that to happen and how we can work together.
Yeah.
And our audience is primarily in Chicago, although, it lives on the internet. Talk a little bit about Greater Illinois and other communities and how they can benefit from this legislation.
Yeah, and that's a really important point, Sylvia. As I've shared with you and Pastor Vance, I'm originally from Maryland, grew up in a very rural area. Grew up in and around farms, and oftentimes, especially with our very coarse political discourse, we tend to pit urban areas against rural areas, against suburbs, and we tried not to do that with this legislation. There are things in this bill that are specifically focused around rural communities, around just transitions. We know that there are communities in Southern Illinois that are impacted by fossil fuel plant closures, and they're impacted by not always having access to clean energy resources historically. So the program is set up so that the funding is distributed equally across northern, central, and southern Illinois. There are specific programs around the just transition. So if communities are impacted by a plant closure, there are things like a workers' bill of rights. Historically, if a plant closes,
that's pretty heavy.
Yeah, if the plant closed, it was the company that decided what benefits were provided. Now there's a requirement that people get treated fairly, humanely. They get retraining, they get access to new jobs, they get access to education. So it's really important that we look at this not as Chicago versus everyone, right, or Southern Illinois, versus everyone. What we tried to do was we got stakeholders from all of the communities. We talked to everyone and tried to be inclusive in creating a bill that's going to provide jobs, opportunity, and access to anyone across our great state that wants to work in the clean energy economy.
Well, that's one of the beautiful parts about this. It's a model that other organizers can use. It's a way of bringing voice to people. Listen, Lead, Share is powerful. Elevate's doing some work in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and wanted to introduce that community to the model. And it's so interesting because grassroots folks were like, yes! And some of the business folks had to think about it for a minute because it is a redistribution of whose voice is heard and passing the mic. And Pastor Vance, what was the role of the faith community in this work, or any of the things that you did with Delmar at that time?
Well, the faith community was always on the cusp of stuff kind of happening, and engaging them was really important for them to understand that they had to be hands-on. The voices in the community, the faith-based community was right in the center, and we just needed to make sure that they understood that it was their responsibility to be engaged fully. And it continues to be a challenge, with COVID and some of the challenges that have gone on. A lot of our, particularly sanctuaries and institutions of faith, have seen some diminishing. But this gave them an opportunity to repurpose themselves in a more crucial way of getting jobs, working in communities and neighborhoods and so forth. So it gave a little more purpose. It wasn't just Sunday morning. Now it was about getting people jobs and working in neighborhoods and communities. Yeah. So that's been an exciting thing.
Yeah, I would build on that, Pastor Vance. This legislation would not have passed without the faith community. As you mentioned earlier, when you talked about grassroots, the faith community built the grassroots. A lot of the grassroots was centered around collaborations between the faith community and the environmental community and stakeholder communities all coming together. And so, like I said, we're in a time now where people are often trying to figure out how are we different. But you can see that when you bring people together, when you have common vision and common goals, we can do great things. And that's why I'm really excited about this legislation and about the collaborations and partnerships that it created throughout the process.
How about a little more on the federal legislation? I know it's like, Delmar, we're asking you everything. But that's because you know it, and that's why you're here. And if you're just joining us, thank you for being a part of Elevating Our Stories. I'm Sylvia Ewing, here with Delmar Gillus, COO of Elevate and Chief Equity Negotiator of the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, and our new co-host, but also a fellow traveler in organizing to help pass the legislation, Pastor Booker Vance. But there's IRA, which is not, it's not the IRA, it is the Inflation Reduction Act. There's other legislation. We've got some elections coming up. We need to understand this federal benefit and legislation while it's here. Can you say more?
Yeah, and Sylvia, to that point about information and knowledge, I'm blessed to work with some of the best coworkers I could ever work with. The team at Elevate really stays connected in all of these spaces, so I'm honored to be able to share, but I did want to do a shout out to the team that works on
Policy.
Yes, the policy team, the comms team, all of the program
Research.
team. And of course, the operations team, which is close to my heart. But just really quickly, when I think about these things, Sylvia, I tend to think and frame them from kind of big picture perspective. And the big picture view is the Biden administration and other stakeholders passed legislation. As you said, the probably flagship is the Inflation Reduction Act. And this legislation has a large, and I mean large, focus on clean energy, on drinking water, on clean air. And what's starting to happen is that those dollars are starting to get to the community level. Yeah. What I've been really excited about is that leaders like Secretary Granholm in particular have been very laser focused on making sure these resources get to the community level. And so they've actually been out in the community, visiting states.
Visited us, or at least Dr. Henry McCoy came to visit us.
Yes, and that was a great pleasure to host him. But rather than just talking about what they're going to do, they're asking questions like, how can we help? How can we make things better? How can we engage the community? So the big thing that I think we're all going to see is these funding dollars are going to start to get coupled with dollars from CEJA and other programs. And we're starting to see things like building electrification, energy efficiency projects, EV projects. And typically these things happened in the next community over. But now we have frontline communities that are hosting demo projects, that are leading these projects. And what they're starting to see is that their energy cost is going down, their energy burden is going down. We're replacing lead water pipes so that people have safe water to drink. We're asking questions about EV so that we can basically have clean air and not have communities that are breathing a lot of pollution. So
well,
a lot is going on.
I'll ask you that question at the start next time, because that's an important one. Thank you so much. We are going from demonstrations to demos, showing things in our community. Pastor Vance, take us home.
This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for joining us, Delmar. I'm sure we'll see you again. Next up, we've got a visit from Amrit Such and Ernie the LED light bulb. But first, here's another exciting video from Elevate Media.
The partnership is part of the Eastside Resilience, and to basically it identified a need in this community for sustainability. The Lennox Center was a part of that initiative to provide a platform for solar and battery storage for clean energy in this particular area.
So we are moving towards clean energy. That's why I wanted to take this training, this course.
My experience with this accelerator program has been great. It's been an opportunity for me to learn more about the different spaces in clean energy, such as solar.
Well, both Detroit and Highland Park are obviously a part of the globe, the global system, and climate change is affecting all of us across the globe. So that's the large picture there. Then when we bring it down and narrow the focus to Detroit and Highland Park, there is the impact of climate change as well. There are opportunities for members of our community who have not been represented in many of these technical fields in the past.
The Lennox Center will provide a space for people to come to as a community center that actually is 100% sustainable, and it will also show as a platform for an initiative for the clean energy on the Eastside Resilience Hub initiative. The project that we have going on here was a great tool and a great resource for our training class. We identified 5 general contractors in different fields that were interested in the clean energy field, and they pretty much got a great vision as to how the clean energy field works and what it means to be sustainable and have a resilient hub.
We are at La Paz Apartments, 3 buildings in the Logan Square community of Chicago that Elevate has helped us electrify, putting in air source heat pumps for heat and air conditioning, and brand new electric stoves.
We are in the room that gives the hot water to La Paz, which is Bickerdike's multifamily center for about 44 families.
When we did our first homes with Elevate for electrification, the people, like maybe a month later, a lady called me and she's like, I used to always have headaches. I don't have headaches anymore. She said, I want to thank you. I'm like, oh, I thought something was wrong, you know? Nobody ever calls to thank us, but you know, it's probably one of the best feelings that we've got out of electrification is how the people feel when we're done.
Hey, I'm Amrit Such, Communications Associate at Elevate. I'm going to pass it over to our friend Ernie for a fall energy saving tip. Take it away, Ernie.
Thanks, Amrit. Hey there, Ernie here with a fall energy saving tip. If you are keeping your curtains closed in summer to stay cool, now's the time to reverse your habits. Open your curtains during the day to let the sun naturally warm your home without turning up the thermostat. That's it for my energy saving tip. Back to you, Sylvia and Pastor Vance.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Elevating Our Stories. Thanks to our guest, Delmar Gillus, and as always to Amrit Such and Ernie, the LED light bulb. We appreciate everyone who makes this program possible here at CAN TV and back at the Elevate office. And it is my pleasure to introduce you again to Pastor Booker Vance, who will be hosting the program from time to time in the future. Pastor Vance?
That's right, Sylvia. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and good night.